Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is the 17th of April, 2013, and Elliot Washor and Charlie Mojkowski are here. Welcome to both of you.
Nice to be here.
Good to be here, yes.
We made it.
Thanks so much. Yes, you've made it. Charlie is coming in through telephone, and so there might be a slight delay when we hear him speak, but let me know, audience, if everything works out okay. The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project, thanks to Blackboard Collaborate for support. We have a great year of virtual conferences going on. These are all free. They have terrific supporters. The School Leadership Summit was in March, and that was supported by PCAL. There are recordings, keynotes, everything up live. It's available for free at schoolleadershipsummit.com. Coming up at ISTE, we have our Fringe event, the parallel event that takes place at ISTE called ISTE Unplugged, that starts with the all-day unconference called Hack Education. So if you're going to ISTE, please do join us. It is free. Then this summer we have our STEMX conference, Worldwide Conference on STEM Education, the Future of Libraries conference this fall, and the Global Education Conference in November. These are terrific events. We have about 100,000 attendees. They're all free, and please feel free to join us for any of them. Go to web20labs.com for more information. Coming up on the interview series tomorrow at an earlier time, Pasi Sahlberg and Vivian Stewart are going to talk to us about global lessons in education. Pasi's book was called Finished Lessons and is fairly well known, and he coined the GERM phrase, the Global Education Reform Movement phrase that's been such a part of our discussions here. That is a joint project with the Asia Society, that webinar tomorrow. Then next week, Jim Popham's going to talk about mismeasurement and the truth about testing. Andreas Schleicher from the OECD on what we can learn about learning from data. John Hunter on his World Peace Program. Peter Gray on Free to Learn. Lots more coming up there that should be fun. Matt Hearn had the wrong time yesterday and did not show up for his session on deschooling, so we're rescheduling that, and it should be up shortly. If you've missed any of the sessions, they are all recorded. They're in full Blackboard Collaborate form and an MP3. Madeline Levine talked to us about childhood. John Hattie on his meta study on education. He's at the University of Melbourne, so interesting. Michael Fullen, Yong Zhao from the School Leadership Summit, Adam Bessie. Before that, hopefully something up there that's interesting, worth your time to listen to. This is a chance for those in the live studio audience to tell us where they're participating from. Look for the star to the left of the map. Click on it twice and then click on the map, and you're going to be very surprised to hear that I'm in Agra, India. I've had a great 10 days looking at schools in India that started with a school for children of leprosy colony and is including Karen Birsetti's school later this week, and just been a fascinating look at schooling, and especially in a country that has such a colonial heritage. We don't have time today to probably talk about all of this, Elliot and Charlie, but so many of the things in your book were so important to me this week as I was reading it. Please feel free to put in the chat the time and the temperature where you are. So far I look like the only non-North American guest, but I know that's not true. And as we move forward, again, in the chat you can indicate where you're participating from. There is a Mighty Bell space for this show. I'll put the link in the chat where I've collected web resources and the like, and you can continue the conversation after the show if you would like to. So we're going to start with a video that Elliot and Charlie have asked me to show, but before we do so, I want to ask one quick question that maybe sets the video up a little. I know I'm deeply immersed in this, right? I spend a couple of times a week talking about education at a very thoughtful, philosophical level. But this book preeminently felt like common sense to me. Are you experiencing, when other people read this book who are encountering your material for the first time, do they say the same thing? Is it common sense to them, or is there a process of beginning to understand the message? And let's start with you, Elliot.
Yeah. They say that all the time. They talk about how much sense it makes and that it's sensible, and that the book challenges people to really use their sensibilities in school, all of them. Having said that, common sense is something that is pretty complex sometimes, because we still don't have much of it in our schools. So I'll stop there. I guess I'll let Charlie chime in. I get that all the time. The other thing they say is, I could have written this book. Glad you did.
Charlie, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, it's similar to Elliot's. Many friends and colleagues who knew I was writing the book with Elliot and participated with me in thinking through much of this often said to me, but this is plain common sense. Why aren't we doing it? And we've really come to the conclusion that it's not so much the people in the schools that don't recognize what needs to be done. It's just the organizational setting in which they're working doesn't really conform to what common sense is many times. The organization doesn't know as well as its people do. So there is that frustration.
Okay, we're going to go to the video now. We'll come back to that question of institutions, Charlie, in a minute. If you're watching the show from an iPad, I don't think you're going to see this video, but I'll put the link in the chat. If for any reason the video doesn't show up or doesn't play on your computer, it should, then we'll just go through. It's about a 4-minute video, and you can watch the link later or concurrently while we do so. So here we go. I'm going to launch it now. First in the chat, here's the link for those of you who are iPad bound, and we'll come back in at the end of the time on the video. And if you need to hit play to see the video, be sure to do so. So is anybody seeing the video?
I see it, but it's not playing. I hit play. I think I can get it to see play.
Okay.
I hit it. Yeah, no, it's working for me.
Okay, good.
Again, there it is.
So I hope I didn't cut anybody off in the middle there, but my low internet connection here in India means I couldn't actually see it. But I think the leader should have about played through. Elliot, I want to ask about sort of Charlie's comment there at the end, right? And here I am in India, and I'm watching sort of highly institutionalized schools, uniforms, high-stakes testing, sort of the vestiges of a colonial system. And is what you're describing and what takes place at big picture schools, do you think a continuation of the sort of secondary thoughtful narrative about education, or does it represent an actual change in our relationship to institutions?
Well, it could. It could, in the sense that we're calling for a convergence or an integration, or as we use the word a lot, attention to who students are, what their interests are in and outside of school for credit in authentic ways. That shouldn't be a tall order. That's what our students are doing, our youth are doing. They're spending a lot of time at it. It's highly productive and engaging. It produces incredible results, and it should be paid attention to by adults and communities, organizations, parents, and schools out there. So having to do that seems like a simple switch, and yet the system is so geared towards delivery rather than listening and paying attention to those interests or starting with those interests, that it actually becomes quite difficult because of the restrictions and regulations that are in place, that we all know all too well, those of us in schools. And people who are doing this outside of school find it very, very difficult to communicate and connect with people inside of schools.
Charlie, as I read the book, and we'll get into some of the details in a second here, I'm sorry to dive so deeply right off the bat, but as I read the book, I kept thinking, this would take a lot of time, and it probably would be scary. Do you think that time and fear are common factors for not embracing this?
Well, it depends on what it is we're asking a school to start embracing. You mentioned before big picture schools, and it is true that we could not have written this book without all of our work in big picture schools. But the book, we think, addresses all schools. We'd like to talk about Leaving to Learn as being the right of every student in every school. But that doesn't mean that every student should be out of school in detailed internships 2 or 3 times a week, 2 or 3 days a week, as they often are in some big picture schools, particularly in their junior and senior year. We offer in the book some kind of easy steps into Leaving to Learn, some of which many non-big picture schools already pursue. And what we're asking is that schools move along that continuum, because at the other end of the continuum of opportunities, travel, entrepreneurial activities, working in clubs, taking a year off, college courses, some of those things available to all students really start to pay huge returns. So we're really asking that schools begin to stretch themselves, start at the easy end, but stretch themselves. And as Elliot said, look at the learning that's going on outside of school. And by outside of school, it could be even the clubs. Elliot mentioned before academic credit. But many times students participate in clubs in schools after the school day, and that work is not at all connected to what's going on inside of school, nor is it awarded academic or graduation credit in many cases. So the disconnects are sometimes within the same building.
Part of what I really enjoyed about the book was the way in which you helped to understand that disengagement can be both leaving school but also staying in school but just not being engaged, and that often there's a richer story than is told through the sort of big 4 that are described in that video. And as that student mentions in the video, there are these deeper 4. Charlie or Elliot, do you want to kind of give us a sense of what those deeper issues are and how they impact all students?
Charlie, do you want to start?
Well, I think Elliot is the most passionate about the deeper 4, so I was going to defer to him at least. I'll fill in if I can.
Sure. So not fitting in and not mattering, and restrictions, and not recognizing interests and talents. Those are the deeper 4. We really spent a lot of time talking with students and staff all over from all schools about this, and we talked and even had a symposium on students who left school and came back, and always found out that it wasn't just one thing about why they left school, of the big 4, that it wasn't sometimes a major crisis. It was just a kind of more of a straw that broke the camel's back. I just can't do it anymore. And it comes down to isolation and alienation, that the school, when you choose it, says you have to fit the school, but the other side of the coin is the school also has to fit you. And that's part of the bargain. The other part is that who you are, the development of yourself, has to matter to the people in the school. What you're saying, how you're feeling, what you're doing, it's not just what they want you to do that focuses around student engagement. It's engaging you on the things that interest you and what you want to do, and starting there as well. In terms of restrictions, as the book points out with Epstein's work, students are more and more restricted nowadays than they've been since public education first started, and it's getting even more restrictive, not less, not just physical, but also narrowly defined content, and as well as the last thing, which is probably the most important, about starting with your interests and doing something about that. So the attention part of this, and I'll just go on for a second or two longer, is that schools use the word mastery a real lot. In the book, we talk about personal mastery. That's real different than mastering just skills. And personal mastery means that you're committed to what you're doing, that you know that it's going to be difficult to do something well, and that it's going to take a long time. And we're not talking about that in the education of our youth. We're not talking also about the attention that's got to be paid to those interests. So I was on Southwest Airlines recently, and the flight attendant got on and said, can we pretend to have your attention for a moment? Well, at least they were being honest in saying that. And, you know, you got to respect that. It was a little bit of a joke, but that's one kind of attention. And I go on United Airlines, and they just drill you. The CEO comes on, starts talking about how good they are, how much customer service, and it's all marketing, but it's just words. And then when the flight attendant comes over to me, I says, what would you like? And I say, a cup of black coffee. And they say, how would you like it? I said, I just told you it was black. They're not even paying attention. They're not listening to me. So then we have the snap of your fingers, pay attention. Just snap your fingers and everybody should come to attention. But that's not the kind of attention we're talking about. We're talking about attention to be paid to those interests where you have to ask and the students know and the school doesn't. They have to listen for a while. So these are big deals.
Yeah. I would only add one item, Steve, one observation that we make in the book, and that is this process of estrangement that takes place between the students and the schools is almost where the school is dropping away from the students as opposed to the students dropping out of school, if you will. That what starts out in the early grades as this kind of warm and fuzzy and embracing the whole child turns very, very quickly, whether it's because of the pressure of tests or the pressure of the Common Core standards or whatever. The pressure moves the school to implement restrictions. The desks go in a row. The curriculum is a kind of scope and sequence that every student must pass through. So it's really the schools that move away from their learners, and that's why we spent a little time in the book trying to get inside the heads and the hearts of young people and capture some of their feelings about this process of estrangement. I think it's important for us to understand what young people are feeling.
So I don't know if I'm significantly delayed here. It looks like I might be, so I apologize for that, but my internet connection might be weak. Elliot, it feels like you could write the same book for teachers. Don't they live in sort of a parallel world? Often their needs and aspirations and interests aren't as recognized.
We did write it for teachers as well. You're right. This is the book can be taken as a general call. To pay attention to who is in front of you, no matter what environment you're really in. And teachers do feel that estrangement, as Charlie's pointing out, and they do feel restricted in the ways that they might teach, and students are learning that they're trying to get to. They feel restricted in their movements as well. We have schools that are very hands-off environments. And you mentioned Pasi Sahlberg in Finland, which we point out just a little bit, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that piece, not just about how the teacher professional development part of it, but the part that allows students to manipulate and make things out of textiles and wood and metals and art, and spend time doing that and getting good at those things. It's all hands off, don't touch, we know the answer. And the problems that you're working on outside of school sometimes barely enter the arena, only as kind of an extra credit or piece, because all the time has to be spent, or so much of the time has to be spent on, on the standards.
Charlie, there's this story in the book, the description of a painting of Icarus by Bruegel. And as I read that and thought about it, I thought, is there a degree to which that is intended to be kind of a warning, right? Of course, don't aspire to be too much. Those who sort of look seriously at the history of education might argue that schools were actually designed to kind of minimize those aspirations and bring people into conformity. Is that a part of the story, do you think?
Yeah, we were using it a bit differently, Steve, in the sense that, and of course, as any work of art would have multiple interpretations, we were looking at the painting and Auden's poem, which parallels it, as saying something about, again, the adults not paying attention to young people who aspire to so much. And many times they will crash and burn. But crashing and burning is in fact elemental to learning. And as it is one of those student expectations, will I have time to play? Will I have time to try things out? Will I have permission to make mistakes? Will there be someone to help me when I do that? So I think the Bruegel painting in that sense is saying, yes, young people are going to reach beyond their grasp, if you will, but that's all right. And students want that permission to play, to try things out, to fail without being punished or even graded. And reading so much of the literature on creativity and innovation recently, I'm struck with how many absolutely phenomenal creative people in history. I'm thinking of Dyson and the vacuum cleaner, and he said this is version, the one that worked was in the 5200s. He had tried 5,100 previous versions of his vacuum cleaner. Well, is that 5,100 pairs of wings strapped on too close to the sun? Perhaps. That's the way I look at that painting, at least one way of looking at it anyway.
I knew I was going beyond your interpretation of the book. I apologize. I didn't mean to misrepresent that. But yes,
oh, no.
So interesting. Okay, so I'm wondering if 5 years ago or 10 years ago, your ability to talk about students' expectations of schools would be received in the same way it is now. Meaning, it feels like we're more open to this sense that students should have expectations, that it's a service that should be serving their needs. Elliot, has there been a change in our willingness to think about what students should expect of schools?
I think that there has been, and I think that there always was this underlying expectation, but because of the amount of not just information, but knowledge that can be delivered in a visual way that becomes hands-on through the internet, that the access has changed things. So you went to school, and school was kind of cordoned off as academic, vocational, commercial, and there was a way to touch stuff, in some cases, and the information was at the school. It was also outside of the school. Many students left and were brilliant at what they did. Now, everybody has access to so much information, it's unbelievable. So that creates a sense in students and a frustration probably in teachers about everybody, including the system, saying there's so much information access out there, and yet this is what you have to know. It's almost said in the same breath. So students do have that kind of access outside of school, and they can get those materials, and they can form support groups, and they have always found adult mentors around. It's just that it's easier because of the internet. So that raises the expectations of students around what school could be. The same thing actually happened during after World War II with the GI Bill. When the GIs came back, they raised the expectations as students for what colleges should be. They actually changed the colleges. Started the community colleges, schools of design, schools of architecture, schools of performance, all started after World War II, and with the choice and the push of these new students who had different kinds of expectations of their school. So it's happened before, just in a different scenario.
I love that parallel. There's an activity I do at workshops where I ask people to think of their deepest learning experience and then to talk about what it was and the conditions that led to it. And it almost always comes back, a significant percentage of those experiences come back to relationships. Charlie, tell us a little bit about students' expectations for relationships.
Well, let me come at it from a few different points of view, and we've done, as the book has come out and we've had more conversations, we're beginning to see multiple dimensions of each of these 10 student expectations, and I'll illustrate that with a few comments about relationships. The one that is most obvious and the one that is most prominent in the book is that students are saying, will my teachers really try to know who I am? Will they build a relationship with me so that they know who I am? And that comes back to, or goes back to Elliot's comment about will they know my interests and so on. But we're seeing a couple of other dimensions of that. And one, if you turn a little bit, it's the students could be asking the school, will you help me to form relationships outside of school with adults who are doing work I think I want to do later on? So that's another dimension of this that I think is important. That is, how are we using each of those 10 expectations, and in this case relationships, as a possible learning opportunity for students, not just an expectation of the schools for a relationship student to teacher, but help me form relationships outside of school. So it has those dual dimensions.
Well, it seems like we are talking much more about the social aspects of learning, and I feel that's really positive. So we have a 15-year-old daughter. She's our last child at home, and after I interviewed Dennis and talked to her about it, she's just really been focused on this idea of internships. Intriguingly, the aspect that she likes the most is, well, if I do an internship and I don't like something, I can just move on. It feels like that's sort of a significant part, right, of our discovering interests, is that we work on something and then we move on. Elliot, do you want to talk a little bit about relevance and how that sort of plays into what you think should happen?
Right. Okay. Well, so this has to do. It's hard to talk about just one. That's just the preface. So there's always the other combinations of the expectations seeping in. So when a student has something that's engaging or relevant to them. The timing has to be right. And let's say they're working at an animal shelter, or they're learning how to be a fireman, or they're learning how to be an engineer, or they're learning how to be an architect, and then they switch. But that kind of learning is going deep and then going broad. So the question to ask students is, what made you change? What connections did you make as you were doing these other things in your life that made you switch in an internship type of experience? So this is, as you go deep, you go broad. What we're running in schools, and we don't have to do this all the time, but we could be the 3M company and say, you're going to explore the things that you want to explore 20% of the time, and we're going to give you credit for it. And it could be a variety of different experiences. But that goes in alignment with a scope and sequence, but you're now also going deep to go broad. You're making connections. It's the other way. For some reason, there hasn't been much time in school to do that. That's the road to mastery. Masters go deep. They get immersed. They practice real long and hard. And then they get connected to other things that they have to figure out. And they may go into another arena, stay on that interest. That's the part that we're missing in schools. And somehow we have to regain that or add it if we completely missed it. I don't think we really completely missed it in different eras of American public education and education around the world. It's just got to be re-upped as real and significant. So what your daughter is experiencing is right. She's going deep and going broad. There's very little time to do that in a scope and sequence, bubble test, measurement system. It has to allow for all.
I'm going to pick on my daughter a little bit more. She also loves this dystopian teen fiction. We read together these books, and it occurs to me, and we've talked about this on the show before, that a lot of that fiction shows youth or teenagers in significant roles, making adult-like decisions, and I've wondered if that's sort of the appeal. Charles, does that ring any bells with you?
Yes, quite a few. I think one of the things we try to emphasize and provide examples of is how many times even very famous learners who've achieved considerable have found an adult early on in their life who provided them with challenges, who showed them what it was to do highly exemplary work. And that, I think, is what students don't see enough of in school, and it's where if school could embrace the outside more directly and positively, they would provide students with opportunities to see, as we say in the book, what it means to do something really well. We talk a lot about, as Elliot said, mastery, but very little of school is really concerned with mastery. It's much more concerned with getting by. And students learn something about learning in many high schools that is really contrary to what's going to be valuable for them later on. So by getting them out, again, going back to the internships, it allows them to try out various things, to bump up against adults who can tell them things that many times their teachers will not tell them about the work and about their role in that work outside of school. And this is not restricted to what we might consider to be vocational education. We're talking about all students here. We're talking about young people who would want to be doctors and lawyers and architects, as well as we're talking about people who see themselves with a future in the trades.
I want to make sure that we have time to talk about the leaving part. So I'm going to kind of move on from the 10 expectations. But again, I loved the book as a whole, but this section to me felt like it was such a valuable way to be thinking, both as parents, as teachers, as homeschool communities, and any kind of a learning community, to be thinking about what students would want and expect and need in their learning. Before we move on, did either of you want to make kind of a final comment on those expectations?
Charlie, you want to talk about the imperatives and how we moved it?
Yeah, well, we're actually, I'll just make that one comment, I guess, as a wrap. We're starting to develop rubrics that faculties can use, so they can use the expectations to really do some self-assessment of the learning opportunities they are providing for young people. So in the book, for example, we suggest that young people could use it as a kind of an assessment of their schools, but we're also beginning to think about how faculty members can come together and use those expectations as design imperatives, if we call them in the book, design requirements, and think about how they can bring more choice, for example, how bring more authenticity, more challenge into it. So we're trying to see it as a tool faculty members can use, and I think that's part of our future work.
Hello?
Again, I'm on a slow connection here, and I may be delayed. I apologize for that. But I love that piece. You actually say in the book that you were hoping that social entrepreneurs would use these as design requirements, and that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think it's already happening. We think it's already happening. We think a lot of the online learning is essentially saying to young people, we can give you learning the way you'd like it. Any time, any place, at any level, from anyone. Almost any content you want. So we think that the expectations are out there. We tried to make them explicit, and we really believe schools can embrace them. We're very much school people, and we've invested quite a bit of our time in trying to help the public school system embrace alternatives, and we think this is one way to do that.
So again, if I'm talking over anybody, I apologize, but I'm trying to jump right in because of the delay in my connection. There's a story you tell as we're moving forward here about how students disengage, and it's Roger Martin's mom who writes a note about Roger's brother Terry that says, Terry was not at school yesterday, and Mishraf called to the carpet, no, you need to give us a response, and Roger's mom saying, well, let me see, no, just a note is required. I think what I loved about that particular story was that it also kind of represents an attitude, sort of a willingness to say, this is important for my child, or this is important for me as a learner, so I'm not going to be argumentative, but I'm just going to say, I'm going to use the system for my benefit. Do either of you want to talk about the disengagement piece and how students disengage and maybe the pattern there?
Yeah, I want to make a comment about what you just said, too. What we're talking about in terms of, in relation to disengagement is, and what you just mentioned is agency. That student that created and developed, had an action that was thoughtful and decisive about whether or not they were learning in school. And the mom actually acted as a fiduciary, meaning she was saying, what's best for my child here? What's best in this situation? That's what a fiduciary does with an agent. Puts their their agent ahead of themselves. So she may have had conflicts with, of course, her child leaving school, but she knew that that was what was best for him, and because he was, in fact, learning. And that she was going to stay with him and make sure about that. And so that's a very powerful piece that you just brought up. In terms of disengagement, it was Ralph Kaplan who started off our quote, who's a friend of ours who was a critic for the New Yorker around design for decades, was mentored by Ray and Charles Eames, and he said, when we met him one day around the book, he said, look, Elliot, just because you leave school doesn't mean that your education is necessarily interrupted. So there's all kinds of things that happen when students disengage in school. And they can disengage in school and be compliant, be there. And like in the case of Harry, I think it was Harry Lewis spoke about Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. They were there and they were not there. They could take it all in and be somewhere else. And then eventually they went somewhere else. What if the school could have provided what they needed and did both, which we think is possible? So disengagement takes many forms. When there's disengagement because of family issues and some of the other big four pieces, those are times when there has to be interventions. What we're talking about is creating a system that's not treatment but prevention. And that's a whole different way of looking at education and healthcare. So if you take care of your body, there's less intervention. You watch what you're eating, if you exercise, if you get good sleep, kind of simple, once again, common sense things to do. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get ill, or something's not going to happen to you, but you're preventing. You have very good habits, and you're following through on them. So that's going to prevent disengagement. We don't have a system like that right now. Our system is an intervention system, and the interventions are sometimes, unfortunately, minimal because there's not the funding there to have the appropriate interventions. But we allowed the person to get sick, if you will. And that could be emotionally, physically, or, just socially disengaged. And so there are pieces and ways to do the system differently is really what I'm getting at. And that is in a prevention mode.
I love the way you kind of flip the competence argument, which is what I hear you saying is that it's not that we shouldn't be looking for competence in students, but that we're so narrowly focused on low levels of competence when we should be thinking about higher levels of competence, mastery, craftsmanship, and artistry. That feels like it's a compelling way to introduce people to the topic. Do you find people respond, Charlie, to that way of describing the current situation, and especially Common Core, maybe?
Yeah, I'm really not sure. As I talk to educators, there's a bit of frustration in I think what we're asking them to do when we say move beyond competence or bring learners to the edge of their competence, if you will, as we use that phrase. And it could be because although the Common Core and some of the new tests, which are more demanding, still don't really capture that notion of moving beyond competence. We passed the test. Let us move on. The old joke of taking the quiz on Friday and then moving on Monday and forgetting all about that. Or I recall Ted Sizer's comment about asking that we give the final exam 1 year after the course is over, so that we could really assess what young people learned. All of those, in a sense, bring to mind that in school, students do not see a lot of learning and work that exhibits mastery, true mastery, and forget about artistry at the ultimate end. And that's why I think schools, if they embraced learning outside of schools, students would have more opportunities to see true artistry, true mastery from people in all lines of work,
For talking over you there again, it's my connection. So we have another daughter who took a gap year after high school, decided to spend a year and went and worked for a humanitarian program in Nepal. We had a surprising response, not entirely a positive one, from our peers with her doing that, sort of stopping out of the system. But a gap year is one of many ways in which someone could leave to learn. Elliot, do you want to talk about some of the things that you learned from Big Picture Learning about the different ways in which we can be encouraging students to leave to learn?
Yeah, I'd like to preface it with a little piece that we had in the book, and that your story about your daughter reminded me of, and that in the book we talked about the what I'm calling the 5 Ps, that students should have learning plans, protocols, people, places, and a portfolio as they leave to learn. That you're not just going off willy-nilly. That there's adults around you, organizations around you. You have long-term and short-term goals. There's some type of adult, fiduciary, making sure that personally you're really good. You're in a good place all the time, somebody you can go to. And so those pieces, those 5 Ps, are put in place for a leaving experience that, in leaving in quotes, you're still connected. It's like you never left, but you're somewhere else. That you're getting credit for what you're doing, and that it counts is a big deal for us as a part of the book and a part of the change of the system. Yep, people go off at gap years, but it's like that doesn't really count. And we want to try to say, wait a second, with the right pieces in place and the right people in place, the right protocols, that those experiences really can count at the level of the institution and should. If you want them to, of course, and we really feel that people do want them to, and they're incredibly valuable. So I'll stop there with that one. I think I put some perspective around that question.
Again, I'm delayed, so I hope I'm not talking over anybody. That's a kind of a dramatic example, right? That's a real departure, but you're not necessarily meaning that you have to really leave. You have descriptions of residents and experts in residence. You have road trips. You have after-school programs, community service. The leaving doesn't have to actually be the sort of dramatic leaving, right?
Right. It's like I said a minute or so ago. It's in quotes. In order to stay in school to learn, you have to sometimes leave to get those experiences that bring you back, that you can connect, draw metaphors, make adult connections, make object connections, make place connections. These are big deals around your growth and your self-concept and your academics. Mm-hmm.
Charlie, I want to ask you a question here. There's a quote in the book or a mention of Charles Ledbetter's description of scaling as either formulaic replication, which would be McDonald's, or proliferation, which would be Chinese restaurants. Is there a third model? Is there a model that more mirrors the experiences you've been describing for students that provides the same kind of support and agency for learning organizations?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to come at it. Yeah, in a way, we were hoping that this book kind of it's a making the case book. It's kind of trying to get people to see a point of view about schools that looks different. So in some respects, we were hoping, and are still hoping, that the expectations in a way go viral. We had this image of students taking these expectations and kind of nailing them to the schoolhouse door, or at least nailing them to the school's website and saying, we need these things. We need these things if you want us to stick around and be really engaged deeply in great learning. And so it's a different kind, it's a kind of organic spread that comes from young people demanding more. As you mentioned earlier, are we more ready for this now? Are schools more ready to say we should be looking at our customer, the student, and seeing what needs that customer has for the tremendous resources we have? So yeah, it's definitely not a scaling through a cookie cutter approach. It has a little of the Chinese restaurant, if you will, in it. But we were also looking at a movement, if you would, that might be generated by students having much stronger voice and maybe a more articulate voice about what they wanted from their schools.
So that's a fascinating description. Ideas spread, it seems to me, not because they're necessarily inherently valuable or moral or good, but oftentimes just because they're good at spreading, because the ideas are spreadable, which means that sometimes ideas spread because they maybe aren't as deep or as thoughtful. Aside from students sort of giving voice here, are there other ways that caring adults you think can make a difference? And again, either of you can chime in here. Maybe this is our final question.
Well, kind of the millions of years of evolution tells us that they do make a difference. But this is how we learn. If you want to learn something, you're either going to go back to school for it and get text-based and meet a person, or you're going to go outside of school, meet a person, get hands-on experience. You're going to go to the library and read about it, and then you're going to go back and forth, and then you're going to do some trial and error. So we really know how to do these things without almost anybody telling us. It's the certification that we need that the institution really gives us. So we do have those people in our lives. What we're trying to do is bring that outside piece of working with your hands and making mistakes and learning by doing and meeting people on the outside and the texts that you're reading on the outside and the organizations that you belong to on the outside to count back into the school, so it's not just based on sitting in a seat or delivering a certain content. When the field is much wider and the ways to learn it are so much broader at the same time and deeper at the same time.
I really love that. Charlie, any final thoughts?
No, I think I'd like to end it with Elliot's last comments.
I'm so sorry that my connection's been so slow. It was nice and strong before we started, and then it weakened, and I hope it wasn't too distracting. Again, the book is Leaving to Learn by Elliot Washor and Charlie Mojkowski. I hope I said that right. Thank you both. What a terrific book. What a great experience for me to have read it. Highly recommend it. Thank you both for being here.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Everybody
Bye now.
liked the webinar. It was great for us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Elliot and Charlie. The way this works, you have to leave the room for the recording to process. I'll try and get it up later today. I'm actually in early morning India time, but we'll get it up soon. Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.